The first time I realized something was wrong was when a family from another state knocked on my door and asked where they could buy tickets to see my waterfall. I honestly thought they were joking. Then they showed me a receipt. Someone had charged them $20 per person to visit a waterfall that sat entirely on my private property. As I stared at the receipt, I noticed the name printed at the bottom. It belonged to the HOA. At that moment, I had no idea that the scheme had already been running for months, or that a state ranger would soon uncover something that would leave the entire neighborhood speechless. Before we get into the story, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Karen Stories Daily for more HOA drama, unbelievable property disputes, and real-life stories. This one starts with a beautiful waterfall hidden in the woods and ends with an HOA making a mistake so big that nobody could believe it. My name is Daniel, and about 4 years ago, I purchased a large piece of wooded property in the mountains. The land included hiking trails, old stone foundations, and a small waterfall that flowed year-round into a clear creek below. The waterfall was not huge, but it was beautiful. People who visited always wanted photos. The sound of the water could be heard from hundreds of feet away. On quiet mornings, it felt like something out of a nature documentary. One reason I bought the property was because of that waterfall. It gave the land character. The previous owner had maintained the trails and occasionally allowed local hiking groups to visit with permission. After buying the property, I continued that tradition. If someone politely asked to see the waterfall, I usually said yes. Most visitors were respectful. They enjoyed the scenery and left everything clean. Everything worked perfectly for nearly 2 years. Then a new HOA board was elected in the neighboring community. The president was a woman named Karen. Her reputation spread quickly. She loved rules. She loved control, and she loved acting as though she owned things that did not belong to her. At first, our interactions were limited. The HOA neighborhood bordered one section of my property, but there were clear boundary markers and survey records showing exactly where ownership lines existed. There was never any confusion, at least not from my side. Then one weekend I noticed something unusual. Several vehicles were parked near one of my trail entrances. Groups of people I had never seen before were walking toward the waterfall. I assumed someone had accidentally wandered onto the property. I approached politely and asked where they were coming from. One man smiled and told me he had purchased a visitor pass. I thought I had misunderstood. A visitor pass for what? He explained that the HOA was advertising guided waterfall visits for tourists and day visitors. According to him, the attraction had become popular online. My stomach immediately dropped. I asked who was collecting the money. The answer was exactly what I feared. The HOA. At first, I thought there had to be some mistake. Surely nobody would charge admission to land they did not own. But over the next several days, I started gathering information. Visitors kept arriving. Some carried printed passes. Others had digital receipts. Every single one pointed back to the HOA. The more evidence I collected, the worse the situation looked. The HOA was marketing the waterfall as a local attraction. They were collecting fees. They were organizing visits, and not $1 was going to the actual property owner. I contacted Karen immediately. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. She claimed the waterfall benefited the entire community. She argued that tourists helped local businesses. She insisted the HOA had every right to manage visitor access. When I asked where that authority came from, she could not provide an answer. Instead, she changed the subject and started talking about community interests. That response told me everything I needed to know. There was no agreement. There was no contract. There was no permission. The HOA had simply decided to treat my property as their own business opportunity. I hired an attorney the following week. He reviewed the situation and was just as surprised as I was. Property records were crystal clear. The waterfall sat entirely within my boundaries. No easements existed. No tourism agreements existed. No HOA rights existed. Legally, the situation appeared straightforward, but before we could take further action, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, a state ranger arrived at my property. At first, I assumed he was responding to a visitor complaint. Instead, he introduced himself and asked a very specific question. Had I authorized commercial tours operating near the waterfall? When I answered no, his expression immediately changed. That was the moment I realized this problem was much bigger than I originally thought. The ranger explained that his office had received multiple reports involving organized paid access to natural areas near protected wildlife habitat. Someone had noticed advertisements online. Someone had noticed tour groups. Someone had noticed money changing hands. And now questions were being asked. As the ranger began reviewing documents and visitor records, I could tell he had discovered something important. Meanwhile, Karen still seemed completely confident. She believed the HOA had done nothing wrong. She even continued promoting waterfall visits while the investigation was underway. What she did not know was that the ranger had already found information that was about to change everything. Over the next few weeks, the state ranger completed his investigation. What he discovered stunned everyone. The issue was not only that the HOA had been charging people to enter private property they did not own, the tour groups were also being routed through an environmentally sensitive area that required special approvals for commercial activity. The HOA had never obtained those approvals. They had never received permission from me, and they had never informed visitors that the waterfall was located on private land. When the findings became official, the entire operation was ordered to stop immediately. The online advertisements disappeared. The visitor passes disappeared. The paid tours disappeared. Karen tried to argue that the HOA was helping the community, but the documents told a different story. Revenue had been collected for months, while the HOA had no legal authority to run the program. At the next community meeting, residents demanded answers. Many homeowners had never known the waterfall belonged to me. Others were shocked to learn tourists had been paying money to visit land the HOA did not own. Questions kept coming. Karen had very few answers. Eventually, the board voted to end all involvement with the property and fully cooperate with the investigation. For me, the outcome was simple. The waterfall remained exactly where it had always been. Private property stayed private property. The trails were reopened only to visitors who had proper permission. And for the first time in months, the area became peaceful again. The funniest part is that none of this would have happened if the HOA had simply asked. I had allowed visitors for years. I had worked with hiking groups. I had always been reasonable. Instead, they chose to treat someone else's property like their own business. That decision ended up costing them far more than they ever expected. Today, the waterfall is still one of my favorite places on the property. The water still flows through the rocks. Families still occasionally visit with permission. And every time I hear someone mention the old HOA tour program, I remember the look on Karen's face when the state ranger explained exactly who owned the waterfall. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments whether you would have taken legal action or handled it differently. And do not forget to share this video and subscribe to Karen Stories Daily for more HOA drama, property disputes, and unbelievable real-life stories. Sometimes the biggest mistake is assuming that someone else's property belongs to you.